Hello, welcome to the online YouTube video lesson for 8th grade history lesson 1. So please write at the top of your page, and if you don't have a pencil and paper, stop the video and get a pencil and paper. Now, that's very important. And we'll go ahead and we'll answer the questions as we go along. Okay, so I assume you're ready to go, and you can write at the top of your page 8th ATH space HIST, HIST period, or you can write history, either way, 10.1, and that stands for Unit 10, Lesson 1, 10.1. Okay, now what we're going to do is I'm going to give you questions and answers as we go along, so please write down number 1 on your paper. And our first question is, what does it mean when a pardon for an offense against a society is given, usually without a trial? So what is it called when a pardon against a society is given? And the answer is amnesty. So as we go along, we'll do our questions like that. Now let's take a look at the word incarcerated, placed in jail, interned, to be placed in the ground for burial. Now we're on to question number 2. Please write number 2 on your paper. And the question is, what is it called? What do you call the period of time after the Civil War when the South states were recognized and placed back into the Union? And the answer is Reconstruction. So number 2 on your paper should say Reconstruction. I'm just trying to make it a little bit bigger for you here. And a tribunal is a court of justice. And a canceled or rejected bill is a veto. And as you can see, that is your question number 3 answer, because your answers are all in yellow. So the part I'll read to you is in pink, and your answer will be in yellow. So by now you should have wrote down number 1, amnesty, number 2, Reconstruction, and number 3, veto. And those are your first 3 answers for what you will hand in to your teacher. Okay, so let's get ready to look at question 4. Question 4 talks about the states coming back into the Union. So we had the South and the North fighting, and the North was the Union, and they felt like they represented the U.S. government, and the South wanted slavery, and they didn't want to be a part of the U.S. government anymore. So, after the war, President Lincoln was president at the time, and he was very sure that the Union was going to win the war, and they did. So he said, okay, now that we've won the war, instead of making the South our slaves, or instead of making the South separate, we need to have a way for them to come back and join the United States. So President Lincoln developed what was called the idea of Reconstruction. So question number 4 is, what was President Lincoln's plan to bring the states back into the Union? And the answer is Reconstruction. So now we're going to get ready to take a look at number 5. So he had a plan for this, and he called it the 10% plan. So question number 5 is, what did Lincoln call his plan to bring the states back into the Union? He had some rules they had to follow. He had 3 rules they had to follow. And he referred to this, or people referred to this, as the 10% plan. So number 5, what was the name of the plan that brought the states back into the Union? And the answer was 10% plan. Okay, so on December 8th, 1863, President Lincoln issued what? And this is question number 6. What did President Lincoln issue on December 8th, 1863 that listed his ideas for letting the states back into the Union? And it was his proclamation of amnesty and Reconstruction. So that's quite a bit to write, so I'm just going to leave it right up there at the top of the screen for you. And now you should be writing down for number 6, Proclamation of Amnesty and Reconstruction. And again, the answers are in yellow for you. So let's take a look at the Proclamation of Reconstruction. What did it say? It said, 1, top officials of the Confederacy. So there was the Union and the Confederacy. The Union was the North, the Confederacy was the South. So if they were from the South, the top officials could never be in office again. So if you fought from the South, since the South lost, you could never be in office. Okay, the majority of the citizens in those states from the South had to swear to obey the laws of the U.S. And finally, 10% of those who could vote within the state had to take an oath that they would have an alliance with the Union, that they would be faithful to the Union. So those were the 3 easy rules that he had. And it was called his Proclamation. That's when he announced his 3 rules, during his Proclamation of Amnesty and Reconstruction. Okay, by now you should have been able to write that down for number 6. So we're going to move on. And now we're going to take a look at the cost of war. So these next 3 things that you see in yellow, those are going to be your next 3 answers for 7, 8, and 9. But let's take a look at what the questions are. So we're going to look at how much war cost. Now you have to remember, this is back in the olden days. So let's take a peek back up there and see, when did he make this proclamation? I know we just had the date, 1863. So even $5 was a lot of money in 1863. So anyway, the North won, but the North spent $2 billion in the war. So how much did the war cost the North? $2 billion. In land alone, in the destruction of the farms and the cities, it cost the South $1.5 billion. So number 8, how much in the destruction of farms and cities did it cost the South? $1.5 billion. Now, with all costs considered, everything total, the entire war cost the United States as a whole. And this is question number 9. How much did it cost the United States as a whole? The war. What was the expense of the war as a whole for the entire United States, North and South? $6.5 billion? That's crazy. Do you know how much $6.5 billion was back in the 1800s? So this was a very expensive war. Okay, now there's some things that are going on that are not going on really well. Some people, some of the northern people, the people from the North, the Republicans, they are not happy with President Lincoln. They think that his plan is way too easy. He needs to be tougher on the South, and they are unwilling to let the South back in Congress. So the next question, and then this is question number 10. Why had President Lincoln lost a lot of support from the Republicans? Question number 10. Why did President Lincoln lose a lot of support from the Republicans? And your answer is going to be because they were unwilling to let the Southern leaders back into Congress. Unwillingness to let Southern leaders back into Congress. Okay, so while you are writing that, we can go on to our next question, which is number 11. And we're also going to go on to question number 12. Number 11. What was the name of the group of these people that were unwilling to let them in? Okay, so there's these people, they don't want to let them in. So they're like, hey, no way, Lincoln, we're not going to let them in. You're too lenient. As a matter of fact, we're going to come up with our own plan. And these group of people, they were called the Radicals. So if you have finished writing for number 10, unwilling to let Southern leaders back in Congress, then please write down the Radicals for number 11. Because that's the name of the group that was kind of giving a lot of resistance to Lincoln and his plan. So these guys come up with their own plan, and they name their plan the Wade Davis plan, which is why question number 12 is, what do you call the plan the Radicals came up with? And answer, Wade Davis plan. Okay. So while you're writing down your answers, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what's happening here. So the 13th Amendment, a lot of people think that the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves, because that's not really true. The Emancipation Proclamation was made during the wartime. And so that's only binding during wartime, so it just freed the slaves during wartime. So we're going to take a look at that next. Hopefully you've got down your answers now, and we're going to go on to that. Okay, so during a wartime act, that's not going to hold up after the war's done. As a matter of fact, after the war's done, it's Congress. So let's take a look at our next two questions, 13 and 14. Number 13, what was the Proclamation Emancipation? What type of act was it? And it was a wartime act. So number 13, wartime act. During peacetime, who would enforce the laws on slavery? Number 14, Congress. During peacetime, who would enact the laws on slavery? Number 14, Congress. We've got one more question here. So, this part here is just talking about how the United States is going to be embarrassed because what's Europe going to think? Because they freed the slaves during the war, and now they might not be free because during peacetime it's up to Congress, and Congress might not make them be free. And the radicals are mad because the Southern people were just allowed back into Congress. And of course they're going to want the slaves because they need them to pick their cotton. So that's why the radicals weren't too happy, by the way, because they just wanted the slaves to stay free. Okay. So now let's skip that little story there, and we're going to go down here. So the radicals had tried to get an amendment passed. They couldn't do it. Now the radicals are working a little bit better with Lincoln, and Lincoln and the radicals are both saying one thing we have to do together is we have to make sure that slaves are free. So this leads us to question 15. President Lincoln was able to persuade enough congressmen that the amendment, the 13th Amendment, was passed on what date? On what date was Lincoln able to persuade Congress to pass the 13th Amendment? And that answer would be January 1st, 1865. January 1st, 1865. That is question number 15. You are finished with your questions and answers. Here's a little thing about the 13th Amendment. I'm going to read it to you super quick. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the U.S. or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. So that's the 13th Amendment. Guys, take a picture of this, send it to your teachers, because if you write it down and we don't get the picture, you don't get the credit. But if you do send us a picture of this, you're covered for lesson 1. And now that you know how to do the lessons, they'll be even quicker in the future. All right. Have a good day.